directly on what was the effect on the Spanish language?
There was no effect on the Spanish language per se. I mean, the Jews carried their dialect, which became different dialects everywhere they went, mostly called Ladino, and that language spread and remained in use until quite recently. You still will hear Ladino in Israel, and I believe in Bulgaria was one place where Ladino lasted a long time, because most Ladino speakers were wiped out during the Holocaust, and Ladino made it easy to identify Jews during the Holocaust if they were speaking Ladino. That the Nazis knew that they were Jewish. But I think what interested about the idea was, first of all, that Spanish left very early in its history. It left the peninsula, and second of all, that it was kind of a missed opportunity for Spanish. I mean, nothing came of it. There was nothing in Spain. I mean, in France, you'll see that when the Protestants are expelled from France, and then France enters centuries of great prestige where the language is very interesting, and it builds on that presence in Europe. And you see that later in the history when there's these pockets of French speakers all across Europe. In the case of Spanish, that kind of died, and it didn't. Spain kind of went down the tubes after the Siglo de Oro, and did not have that kind of prestige and power that would have kept the language alive and kept people interested in the links between different Spanish-speaking populations in Spain. And it's one of the curious things about Spanish. It never reached that preeminent phase that French reached, in the 18th and in the 19th century, after the Siglo de Oro. Things went downhill for Spain.
You mean in terms of its status in
exactly
in Europe?
Yeah, and it never became the language that French did.
Despite the fact that in the Americas it was just going great guns.
Which is interesting, because the French managed to make everybody believe that their language was important and prestigious and carried important and prestigious ideas. But of course, Spain, for various reasons, and one of them, of course, is the strong influence of the Catholic Church, that sort of cut Spain off from the Enlightenment, and Spain never was able to do that with its language the same way as the French did.
So it was almost by default or by mistake or just a byproduct of empire that Spanish spread in the New World, where it was not spreading in the Old World. Well,
it's interesting. Spanish didn't spread very well in the early centuries of colonialization. The Spanish weren't really interested in spreading their language in the New World. Spanish missionaries were set up, and they learned native languages in the Americas because it was just easier and more effective for converting people than teaching Spanish. And Spanish was not taught. There was no real interest in teaching it. I guess the key period for the spread of Spanish is really the independence movement of Latin American countries, when all of a sudden you have new political entities that have to have a language. And of course, the interest of having an international language is strong for a new country that needs to create relations with other countries and solidify its link with Spain, paradoxically, even though it became independent. So you see that happening. It's much later than people think. People didn't learn Spanish until 19th, sometimes 20th century in some cases, and it was just an effect of practicality on the part of the Spanish.
Right, and yet